It's the middle of 2023, over a year into Russia's war with Ukraine, and an unassuming woman is living in the small town of Ochakiv. Nestled in the south of Ukraine, inside the Mykolaiv region, the town is unremarkable, except for one crucial fact. It contains a military base. The unnamed woman has spent at least a few months working in a shop located at the base, selling much-needed supplies to Ukrainian soldiers and making general chit-chat about the war effort, but her questions are a little too specific, a little too suspicious. She isn't asking about how the war is going. The woman is trying to find out information about the warehouses in the base, particularly those packed with ammunition, in addition to showing a strange interest in the location of Ukraine's electronic warfare systems. A civilian shouldn't be asking these questions. She shouldn't even be thinking about that information because she has no reason to need to know it. The camera is suspicious too. On more than one occasion, the woman has been spotted wandering around the military base far away from the shop she's supposed to staff. Camera in hand, she's been taking photographs of key locations. Again, locations a civilian shouldn't know about or understand, for no reason that the Ukrainian soldiers can think of. Something fishy is clearly going on. And that was confirmed on August 7, 2023, when operatives from the Security Service of Ukraine, known as the SSU, stormed the woman's house. Arresting her in the kitchen, the SSU discovered that this woman has been gathering information that was then relayed to Russia to aid what the SSU believes would have been a massive airstrike on the Mykolaiv region. The strike's purpose? The assassination of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Ever since Vladimir Putin began his war with Ukraine, he's poured resources into trying to eliminate the country's charismatic leader, but every assassination attempt, so far, has been thwarted. All of which leads us to a few questions. How many times has Putin tried to assassinate Zelenskyy? What would be the benefit to Russia if he managed to pull it off? And, most importantly, why has every attempt Putin has made to off his biggest rival failed so far? We'll start with the first question. The attempt with which we open the video is far from the only attempt Putin has made on Zelenskyy's life outside of the battlefield. In this case, he aimed to cover his tracks by arranging an airstrike on a prominent military base. He just wanted to do it while Zelenskyy was there. A happy coincidence that would just so happen to cut off the head of Ukraine's war machine. And therein lies the clue to what Putin is trying to do. According to The Guardian, a British newspaper, Putin has a decapitation strategy in place focused solely on Zelenskyy. His logic is simple. Cut off the head of the enemy and the rest will follow. But each plan has failed before any of Russia's covert operatives have either managed to get close to Zelenskyy or before they've transmitted the key information that would allow Putin to take out Ukraine's leader. That strategy started in early February 2022, right at the beginning of Putin's invasion. It was in that month that Putin delivered a simple instruction to Ramzan Kadyrov, the Chechen leader: eliminate all of Ukraine's leaders. That's a far cry from relying on one woman to send photos and information, but this strategy, just like the August 2023 attempt on Zelenskyy's life, ended in abject failure. Heeding Putin's instructions, Kadyrov sent an elite unit of his country's special forces, known as the Kadyrovites, into Ukraine. They entered Ukrainian territory and promptly divided into two, doubling their chances of getting close enough to Zelenskyy to carry out Putin's assassination orders. The first of those groups made its way to Gostomel, just 16.1 miles away from Kyiv. There it was met by the SSU, which eliminated the small group right on Zelenskyy's doorstep. What happened to the second group, and where it was when the Ukrainians caught up to it, is less clear. The Independent, another British newspaper, simply quoted Oleksiy Danilo, the chief of the Ukrainian National Security and Defense Council, as saying that the would-be assassins were under fire at the time of the elimination of the first group. We are all well aware of the special operation that was to take place directly by the Kadyrovites to eliminate our president, Danilo told the newspaper. And the reason that Ukraine knew to look out for the Kadyrovites? The Russian Federal Security Service, or FSB. Specifically, anti-war agents operating within the FSB apparently tipped off the SSU about the incoming assassination attempt, allowing Ukraine to thwart the Chechens before they managed to achieve their objective. But Putin is a smart man. He knew that placing all of his eggs into a single basket, even a basket as capable as the Kadyrovites, could leave him with those very eggs on his face if the basket happened to break. So at the same time he was delivering his orders to Kadyrov, he was also speaking to a pair of private military companies, Wagner and Reddit. Reddit's forces were first ordered to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, arriving at their destination via Belarus. There, the unit received orders from Russia to move covertly throughout Ukraine, with the goal being to make its way into the Kyiv region. From there, the objectives were the same as those handed to the Kadyrovites: take out the country's political leadership and, if possible, eliminate as many members of the SSU in the process. Supposedly financed by the Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska, Reddit sent more than 1,000 fighters into Ukraine in an effort to achieve this goal. Every single one of those fighters failed, in large part because Ukraine and its Western partners already knew about the plans before Reddit ever managed to enter the country. A counter-offensive was organized, resulting in Reddit losing about 90% of the fighting force it had sent to Ukraine, approximately 900 operatives, before it withdrew. Another failure for Putin. And things wouldn't get much better when he sent in the Wagner Group. Even as the Reddit mercenaries and fighters from Chechnya were entering Ukraine, Putin was also giving orders to the Wagner Group. Like Reddit, the group is a private military company, essentially a group of mercenaries that operates independently of Russia's military but often works in tandem with it for the right price. In January 2022, just 5 weeks before he started his invasion of Ukraine, Putin flew a 400-strong group of Wagner mercenaries from Africa. Each member of the group was a highly trained operative with combat experience, with the militia being handed a list by Putin that contained the names of 24 government officials. Zelenskyy's name was on that list, as were the names of several other major players in the Ukrainian government and in the country itself. The Daily Mail reported that Vitaly Klitschko, the heavyweight champion boxer who became Kyiv's mayor, was also on the list, as was his brother Vladimir. The order was simple: get into Ukraine and kill these 24 people. But that didn't happen. As with Putin's previous assassination attempts, Kyiv received word of what the Wagner Group was planning. It aimed to sneak its way into Ukraine via Belarus, where it would use signals pulled from the mobile phones used by the targets on their list to track their quarry at all times. In response, Kyiv implemented a 36-hour hard curfew, forcing all citizens into their homes so that the country's soldiers could sweep the city's streets to hunt down the Wagner operatives. The order was clear: get off the streets or risk being liquidated. Ukraine hasn't provided any details of who or what it found during this curfew period, but the one thing we know for sure is that the Wagner Group's assassination attempt also failed. After all, it's been more than 2 years since the 400-strong team entered Ukraine, and Zelenskyy is still very much alive and with us. Those combined orders make up for the 3 assassination attempts, all started at the war's outset and all involving groups of operatives that were supposed to infiltrate Kyiv and kill Ukraine's leader. None of those attempts worked, likely leading to Putin concluding that sending large groups to kill Zelenskyy was a recipe for failure. Hence his reliance on an unnamed woman working in a military base to send his forces key information that would allow him to take Zelenskyy out. That assassination attempt failed too. And depending on who you listen to, Putin has tried to get rid of Ukraine's president many more times. While Ukraine understands that its foreign partners, including the United States, recognize at least 3 attempts, the real number is supposedly much higher. That's according to Mikhailo Podolya, a Ukrainian presidential advisor, who told Pravda that he believes there have been at least a dozen attempts made by Putin on Zelenskyy's life. Assuming they actually happened, those additional attempts also failed. All of which brings us back to the question that we posed at the beginning of the video: why can't Vladimir Putin seem to be able to kill Volodymyr Zelenskyy? A handful of the reasons have already been hinted at, starting with Russia's own FSB. The Russian government's website called the FSB a federal executive body with the authority to implement government policy in the national security of the Russian Federation. According to Brunel University London, that nondescript statement of the FSB's purposes hides the fact that it's the most influential federal institution in Russia. It's an offshoot of the KGB, Russia's most famous spy network, and has been around since the Cold War. Crucially, it's also the former domain of Putin, who served at the helm of the FSB throughout much of the 90s. According to Dr. Kevin Rieler, a lecturer in security and intelligence studies at Brunel University, the FSB is far more than a simple copy of the KGB. It has an extremely large remit, ranging from counter-terrorism to surveillance, as well as an overarching goal of maintaining political stability in Russia. But the group isn't infallible. Within its ranks lurk many Russians who are against Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Sitting in the shadows, those operatives have been funneling information to Ukraine's leadership since the beginning of the war. And as we saw with the Kadyrovites, that information has proven vital to thwarting the multiple assassination attempts that Putin has put in place. In a report published in The Independent, it's also claimed that these anti-invasion operatives in the FSB also delivered information to Zelenskyy and his team on the Reddit and Wagner attacks. This isn't speculation either. The same newspaper report also quotes Ukraine's Secretary of National Security and Defense, who appeared on television to say, "We have received information from members of the FSB who do not want to take part in this bloody war." He even points out that this information was used by Ukraine to eliminate the Kadyrov elite soldiers that Putin sent in during the early months of the war. Wagner also appears to have confirmed this collusion, or something very similar to it, when a source close to the group told The Times how it was eerie just how much Ukraine appeared to know about its operations. The implication is clear. Ukraine has inside sources relaying mission-critical information that allows it to thwart Putin's assassination attempts. But disaffected Russian operatives inside the FSB are far from the only sources of information for Zelenskyy. His international allies have also played a major role in why Putin has spent the last 2 years failing to assassinate his Ukrainian counterpart. Specifically, America's Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, has been helping Ukraine to gather information about Russian assassination attempts since the war's beginning. That's according to a February 2024 report in the New York Times that focused on a small Ukrainian military base buried within a dense forest. The base had already been destroyed, its command center was a burned-out husk of its former self during the early days of the war, and from the outside looking in, the base appears to be abandoned. Another casualty of the war, but that isn't the case. Close to that base is a secret passageway that descends into a top-secret bunker. That bunker contains Ukrainian soldiers who are hidden away while using complicated spying equipment to track Russia's satellites, allowing them to eavesdrop on the conversations Russian commanders have among themselves about their objectives in the country. That bunker is new. It was built to replace the burnt-out command center mere months into the war, and according to the New York Times, it's become the secret nerve center of Ukraine's military by funneling top-secret Russian information to troops on the ground. That nerve center is funded by the CIA. That's according to General Serhiy Veretsky, one of the base's top intelligence commanders, who simply said 110% when asked if the CIA funnels money into the base. But the most interesting fact about this funding is that it predates the beginning of the war. The New York Times says the base and the partnership that enabled its creation began over a decade ago, with a stop-start relationship that's developed under 3 American presidents. Through that relationship, Ukraine has managed to root out many of Russia's double agents, transforming its intelligence agencies from being thoroughly compromised by Putin to being some of the most important partners Washington has today. The report goes on to claim that the underground base is just one of 12 secret locations that Ukraine has constructed over the last 8 years, all funded, at least in part, by the CIA. That partnership has proven as fruitful to the US as it has to Ukraine. It was through this network that the United States received confirmation of Russia's role in the downing of a commercial jet in 2014. Plus, the CIA has trained special operatives within Ukraine's security services, a commando force known as Unit 2245, that's captured Russian communications equipment and drones for the CIA to reverse engineer. So the US gets valuable information about Russia and the quality of its military equipment. In return, Ukraine gets the same information, along with valuable information about Russia's plans within the country whenever the US has access to that information. The New York Times says that at least one Ukrainian official claims that the CIA shared intelligence with Ukraine that helped the country disrupt a plot being made against Zelenskyy. All of this adds up to a two-pronged intelligence network that empowers Ukraine to thwart the many attempts Putin has made on Zelenskyy's life. The dissatisfied members of the FSB tell Zelenskyy about the operations, while the bases Ukraine has built with CIA cooperation enable the country to track communications and get ahead of those threats before they ever reach the president. Of course, none of this would mean anything were it not for the final reason why Putin simply can't assassinate Zelenskyy: the SSU. Formed in August 1991, the SSU has had something of an anti-Russian purpose from its very beginnings. It was initially created to help with the liquidation of the old Soviet system of state security agencies that had existed during the Soviet Union era, while taking on additional tasks related to helping Ukraine maintain its sovereignty and addressing the country's national security issues. That's essentially the role the SSU served right up until the outbreak of the war, after which the organization quickly pivoted. Today, it's staffed by some of the elite that Ukraine has to offer, from operational units, which have helped to directly thwart assassination attempts made against Zelenskyy, to counterintelligence officials and cyber specialists. The latter two groups are responsible for funneling yet more intelligence into Kyiv, while also doing everything they can to disrupt Russian operations on the ground. It's a highly effective group. Visit Ukraine points out that the SSU has exposed over 600 Russian agents operating in Ukraine since the beginning of Russia's invasion. It's also initiated over 1,400 legal proceedings against those who it believes are guilty of violating Article 111 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, which covers high treason against the country. Those numbers are much higher if you believe the figures on the SSU's official website. It claims to have exposed over 3,500 Russian collaborators and accomplices since the beginning of the war, in addition to initiating the launch of 106,000 criminal proceedings. Its cyber experts have also neutralized 7,700 cyber attacks since February 2022. You could consider the SSU the sword that acts upon the intelligence that Ukraine receives from the FSB and CIA, though that would be overly simplistic, given that the group has its own counterintelligence operatives. What is certain is that the SSU has played a key role in keeping Putin's assassination attempts at bay, directly protecting Zelenskyy against threats both internal and external. Perhaps the most direct comparison to make is between the SSU and FSB directly. Both serve similar purposes for their countries. However, it appears clear, simply in the foiling of so many of Putin's assassination attempts, that the SSU is currently doing a better job. The FSB has too many leaks, which has helped the SSU protect Ukraine's president against several major threats. So we have three clear reasons why Putin can't assassinate Zelenskyy. As mentioned, the FSB isn't as watertight an organization as it's supposed to be, at least if Ukraine is to be believed. It contains anti-war operatives working directly under Putin's nose, who are supposedly funneling intelligence to Kyiv. That intelligence is backed by that received thanks to Ukraine's ties to the CIA. Whether funding the installation of equipment that allows Ukraine's spy network to discover information more efficiently, or by providing valuable information outright, the United States has played a not insignificant part in keeping Zelenskyy alive. Add to all of that the SSU, which has coordinated the defense of the president based on this intelligence exceptionally, and you have clear explanations of why Putin's attempts on Zelenskyy's life fail so consistently. And all of that leaves us with one question to answer. What would happen if Putin somehow succeeds? Just because Putin has failed to kill Zelenskyy multiple times already, that doesn't mean he's going to stop. There could be operations ongoing as we speak that are designed for that very purpose. Putin needs only one of those operations to succeed. After all, it doesn't matter if your first 10 assassination attempts end in failure. If number 11 is a success, you've still accomplished your goal. Assassinating Zelenskyy would represent so much more than taking out Ukraine's leader to Putin. He'd eliminate a man who has become the figurehead of Ukrainian independence, an icon, one whose death could completely sap the morale of the soldiers who are still fighting as hard as they did at the war's beginning. Zelenskyy is fully aware of this, which is why he now plans his overseas visits with immense secrecy. In fact, the leaking of his visit to Brussels in February 2023, just 3 days before his arrival, represented a massive security threat. But that doesn't mean the country lacks a plan. That much was confirmed by Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, when he told CBS in 2022 that the Ukrainians have plans in place. Though he offered no more information about what those plans might be, he did stress that the country's strategy in the case of Zelenskyy's assassination would ensure continuity of government in some form. Ukraine's constitution also offers some insight into what would happen if Putin was successful. There would be no power vacuum, says Mykola Kniazitsky, who's a lawmaker for Ukraine's opposition party. He points out that Ukraine's constitution states that the reins of power are handed over to the chairman of the Ukrainian parliament in the event that the country's president isn't able to fulfill their duties. Putin might be counting on that to play into his hands. After all, the current chairman, Ruslan Stefanchuk, is a member of Zelenskyy's Servant of the People party. However, he's not the most trusted individual in the world, with Politico reporting that he has an approval rating of about 40%, as well as suffering from a lack of popularity among opposition lawmakers. Putin may be hoping that assassinating Zelenskyy could destabilize Ukraine due to his low approval. However, Adrian Karatnitsky of the Atlantic Council suggests that this isn't likely to happen, claiming that Ukraine has a strong leadership team outside of Zelenskyy and we'd likely see a collective government form to tackle the invasion. Karatnitsky also suggests that though Zelenskyy is an important figurehead around which Ukraine united, he's not the be-all and end-all of the country's resistance. The country has reached a point of a very substantial solidarity and national unity, he says. If something terrible happened to Zelenskyy, it would not be as decisive as you might think. So the psychological shock of a successful assassination may not reverberate with the power that Putin may want. It certainly won't be as effective now as it would have been if Putin had successfully killed Zelenskyy during the early days of the war. Ukraine's democratic institutions have only strengthened as a result of Russia's invasion. Its people have a stronger sense of nationhood and a single enemy on which to focus. And perhaps unexpectedly, Russia's invasion has also led to Ukraine being welcomed into the global geopolitical fold in a way that might not otherwise have been possible if Putin hadn't attacked. What might be more worrying for the country is what the loss of its president might represent in terms of international aid. Politico points out that Ukrainians take a more balanced approach to Zelenskyy and his work than the international media appears to take. While he's still considered a figurehead for the country's war effort, he's not above criticism in his homeland. For instance, many Ukrainians have taken issue with his failure to properly prepare for a Russian invasion, indicating that he underestimated the threat even as they support him in his efforts to coordinate Ukraine's defense. That's a far cry from the international opinion of the leader, which tends toward a more emotional response, thanks to Zelenskyy's powerful rhetoric and his ability to negotiate with and cajole international leaders into supporting his country. With no Zelenskyy, Ukraine's ability to attract funding and support may potentially be compromised, even as the country itself retains its political and military structure. That potential may be reason enough for Putin to continue his assassination attempts. It appears he's given up on the idea of sending large groups into the country to infiltrate Kyiv and take out Zelenskyy. That plan has been rumbled on multiple occasions, with Ukraine now being far more capable of defending against such attacks than it was at the beginning of the war. His use of a single woman to try and gather intelligence information about a Ukrainian military base may be more indicative of his future assassination attempts. The key may no longer lie in sending ground forces to take out Zelenskyy directly. Perhaps all Putin needs is to know where his opposing counterpart is at one crucial juncture so he can launch an attack that takes him out as part of the collateral damage of a much wider assault. What happens if Putin succeeds remains to be seen, and even if Zelenskyy is successfully assassinated, it may be that Russia has to continue to rely on its strategy of wearing the country down through constant assaults, rather than assuming an assassination would immediately bring Ukraine to the negotiating table. But what do you think about these assassination attempts? Are there any reasons for their failure beyond those highlighted in the video? Do you believe Putin is placing as much stock in the effectiveness of an assassination as he clearly did at the beginning of the war? Tell us what you think, and thank you for watching the video. Now go and check out all Putin's biggest failures, or click this other video instead.